The nanny's scream lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, 12 armed men drew their weapons. Security feeds cut to every camera in the building. 3 phones dialed simultaneously, and somewhere across Seoul, in the back of a black armored car, the most dangerous man in South Korea felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not the ordinary kind, not the professional kind that sharpened his instincts in negotiations or reminded him to check his exits in a room. This was something else entirely. This was the fear that lives underneath everything else. The fear that no amount of money, no army of bodyguards, no empire of power can ever fully eliminate. The fear of losing someone you cannot replace. His phone rang. 1 ring. He answered. "Sir." His security chief's voice was controlled, but barely. "Min-jun is not in the apartment." 3 seconds of silence. "Say that again." "Min-jun is gone, sir." The line went silent. In the front seat, the driver noticed the temperature change before he noticed anything else. Not the real temperature, but something in the air. The quality of the silence from the back seat. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He had worked for Kang Jiwoo for 6 years. He knew better than to look. "Turn around," said the voice from the back. "Sir, we're almost at—" "Turn around." The driver turned around, and the city of Seoul had no idea what was coming from it.
3 weeks earlier. A freezing Tuesday morning in Dobonggu, North Seoul, where the subway smells like wet concrete and the restaurants serve soup for breakfast because it's the cheapest hot thing available. Oh Soonja stood in the bathroom of her rented room at 5:47 a.m., staring at herself in a mirror with a crack running diagonally across the top right corner. She looked old. She was 34. Her hands were wrapped in bandages again. The skin on her knuckles had split from the industrial cleaning chemicals she used at her second job. She had a bruise on her collarbone from where a restaurant craze had slipped. Her eyes were the color of someone who hadn't slept properly in 2 years. From the other room came the sound of coughing. Small, wet coughs, the kind that made her stomach tighten each time. She walked out of the bathroom and stood in the doorway of the room where her daughter slept. Chaeyeon, 8 years old, thin as winter light, was already awake, sitting up against her pillow, waiting for the cough to pass. When she saw her mother, she smiled. "Amma," she said softly, "you look tired." "I'm fine." Soonja crossed the room and pressed the back of her hand to Chaeyeon's forehead. "Still warm. How do you feel?" "Better. A little better." They both knew it wasn't true. The leukemia diagnosis had come 4 months earlier on a Thursday afternoon that Soonja would never forgive for being ordinary. Sunny weather, street vendors outside the hospital, a child laughing somewhere down the hallway, and then a doctor in a white coat sitting across a desk, speaking carefully, and Soonja's entire world rearranging itself into a before and an after. Her husband was already gone. Factory accident, no insurance, debt that arrived in official envelopes with government stamps. She had been carrying all of it alone. "Amma," Chaeyeon tugged her sleeve, "don't make that face." "What face?" "The one where you're scared but pretending you're not." Chaeyeon tilted her head. "I can always tell." Soonja sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled her daughter close. "Go back to sleep," she whispered. "I'll make porridge before I leave." She held Chaeyeon for a long moment in the early morning dark of that small, cracked room, and she breathed her in, and she thought, "I will do anything, whatever it takes, anything." She didn't know yet how true that would become. That same morning, the employment agency called with a new position. Private household, Gangnam, high salary. The client requires complete discretion, no personal questions, no outside communication about the household. Interested? Soonja thought of the hospital bill on her kitchen table, the number that didn't look real. "Yes," she said, "I'm interested." "Good. One more thing." A pause. "The client's name is Kang Jiwoo. I assume that means nothing to you." It meant nothing to her. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she had asked more questions. If you asked anyone on the street in Gangnam about Kang Jiwoo, they would tell you he was a businessman. Real estate, private security, import logistics, very successful, very private. If you asked the right people, the ones who lived in the parts of Seoul that don't appear on tourism maps, they would not answer at all. They would look at something else, change the subject, find a reason to be somewhere else immediately. That silence was the truest answer. At 38, Kang Jiwoo controlled more of Seoul's underground economy than any police report had ever fully documented, not because investigators hadn't tried, because the ones who tried too hard found their cases reassigned, their funding cut, their careers quietly redirected. His influence reached places that influence wasn't supposed to reach. He didn't advertise this. That was part of what made him effective. He moved like weather, invisible until the damage was done. His own organization ran on two rules. Loyalty was rewarded beyond what anyone expected. Betrayal ended careers, and sometimes more than careers. His chief of security, a former special forces officer named Min, had served him for 11 years. He had seen things in those 11 years that permanently altered the way he understood human nature. He would say to anyone who asked, which almost no one did, that Kang Jiwoo was the most controlled, most strategically intelligent, most quietly terrifying person he had ever met. He would also say, and this was the part that surprised people, that he had never once seen him be cruel for pleasure. Jiwoo didn't enjoy fear. He used it. There was a difference. The one variable that made no strategic sense in the architecture of Kang Jiwoo's life was his son, Min-jun, 4 years old, round face, the laugh of someone who has never been taught to be afraid of anything. He had his father's dark, watchful eyes, but none of his father's caution. He ran at the world with his arms open, trusting that it would catch him. His mother had been like that. Ji-yeon, Kang Jiwoo's wife, had died 13 hours after Min-jun was born from a hemorrhage the doctors called unpredictable, and the Jiwoo spent months afterward researching in clinical papers at 2 a.m. looking for someone to blame, before eventually accepting there was no one. He had loved her in the way that men who don't know how to love anyone manage it when it finally happens, completely and without backup. When she died, he buried that love somewhere deep. And then Min-jun opened his eyes for the first time and looked at his father, and the love came back. Different, but the same kind of total. Soonja arrived at the penthouse on a Monday at precisely 7 a.m. The building alone was enough to tell her this was a different world. 50 floors of glass, a lobby where even the security desk looked expensive. Men in dark suits who didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, and moved like they were always calculating exits. She kept her eyes down and her expression neutral. The personal assistant, a young woman named Cha Eun-bi, efficient and cold as a steel ruler, walked her through the apartment with a clipboard. The rules were extensive. You do not discuss household matters outside this building. You do not take photographs. You do not ask questions about Kang's schedule or guests. You do not speak to Kang unless he speaks to you first. You do not— "I understand," Soonja said quietly. Eun-bi looked at her. Good, because the last housekeeper didn't. She no longer works anywhere in Gangnam. The meaning was not subtle. Soonja nodded once. She went to work. She was good at being invisible. Years of cleaning other people's homes had taught her how to move through a space without disturbing it, how to be present without being noticed. She had been invisible her whole life. She was invisible on day 1, and day 2, and day 3. Then Min-jun found her. It was 9:23 a.m. on her second day. She was washing dishes when she heard small feet on the kitchen tiles, and then a stool scraped against the floor, and then a small person climbed up beside her with the focused effort of someone scaling a mountain. She looked over. A small boy, round cheeks, dark eyes studying her with serious, unblinking attention. She said nothing. She went back to the dishes. He said, "You have sad eyes." She stopped washing. "My Ioma used to say that about people,"
he continued thoughtfully. She said it means they feel things extra. He considered this. I think that's good, feeling things extra. Soonja looked at him fully for the first time. He reached into the pocket of his pajama top, it had cartoon dinosaurs on it, and produced a slightly crumpled biscuit. Hilmoni says snacks help, he said, offering it to her with great seriousness. She's not here anymore, but I remember what she said. Something happened in Soonja's chest. A crack, like ice giving way. She took the biscuit. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she expected. He nodded with profound satisfaction. I'm Min-jun. What's your name? Soonja. Soonja-si. He tested it carefully. Then, you can stay here. I'll tell Appa you're good. As if it were entirely his decision, as if this 4-year-old boy in his dinosaur pajamas had the authority to grant her permanent residence in his father's penthouse. She almost smiled, and she almost forgot for 30 seconds about the bill on her kitchen table. Almost. 9 days in. Soonja was in the laundry room, folding sheets that cost more than her monthly rent, when her phone buzzed. Hospital number. Her heart clenched the way it always did. Miss O. The doctor's voice was gentle in the way that doctors are gentle when the news is not. We've been reviewing Chaeyeon's latest results. The current protocol isn't working as we hoped, but there's a newer treatment. Imported medication, a specialist procedure. The response rates are significantly better. How much? She asked, because that was always the question, the only question that mattered. 47 million won. A pause. We would need a decision within 2 weeks. After that, the window for optimal intervention. She stopped hearing him. 47 million won. She stood in the laundry room of a penthouse apartment, holding sheets that belonged to a man whose watch probably cost more than that, and the numbers sat in her chest like a stone. She had nothing. No credit, no assets, no family left who hadn't already given everything they had. She had already sold her wedding ring, her husband's watch, the small gold chain her mother had given her the year before she died. She had already borrowed from neighbors who had nothing either. 47 million won. 2 weeks. Her daughter. She put the phone in her pocket. She sat down on the laundry room floor. She pressed both hands flat on the cold tile, and she breathed. And in the breathing, in the terrible stillness of that moment, something shifted inside her. A door she hadn't known was there, opening. 3 days before the call, she had been on the wrong side of a wall. She had been changing a light bulb in the hallway, a task so routine she was almost sleepwalking, when she heard voices from the adjacent room, 2 of the bodyguards, speaking in low tones, thinking the corridor was empty. She should have moved away immediately. She didn't. Park Geun-ho's been quiet too long, said the first voice. That's never good. He knows he can't touch the boss directly, too exposed. He's looking for another angle. What kind of angle? A pause. The kind that doesn't involve frontal conflict. A low, contemptuous sound, the kind that cowards use. She heard the name Park Geun-ho. She didn't know who that was. She filed it away without understanding why. Now, sitting on the laundry room floor with 47 million won echoing in her skull, she understood why. Because desperate people find information they weren't meant to find and turned it into something they were never meant to use. She heard a name. She had a phone. She needed to find a number.
It took her 4 hours, 3 payphones, and 2 carefully worded conversations with people who operated in the outer edges of Seoul's information economy. The kind of people who knew who to call if you wanted to reach someone who didn't want to be reached. At midnight, she stood at a payphone on a street she had never been on before, 3 kilometers from her apartment, with her collar turned up against the cold. She dialed. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, smooth, educated, unhurried. I was wondering when someone from that building would call, said the voice of Park Geun-ho, and Soonja's blood went cold, because she hadn't told him where she was calling from. He already knew. Don't hang up, Park Geun-ho said pleasantly. I know you're scared, That's understandable. But you called me, which means you need something, and I have a feeling I know what it is. Soonja forced herself to breathe. How do you know where I... Ms. Oh Soonja, 34, widowed, one daughter, Chayen, currently admitted at Gangbuk Samsung Hospital. Diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Current treatment proving insufficient. A pause. I know a great deal about you. That shouldn't alarm you. Consider it a sign that I've been paying attention. Her grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? She asked. Right now? I want to help you. His voice was warm, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining a simple business arrangement. You have access to something I need. I have resources you need. This is very simple, Ms. O. These arrangements usually are. I won't do anything that hurts him. The child? A small, almost amused sound. Of course not. I'm not a monster. Min-jun would simply be a guest, comfortable, safe, well cared for a short period, long enough for me to have a conversation with his father from a position of strength. A week at most, perhaps less. And Chayan, full treatment covered, 47 million won. I'll add 10 million for your living expenses during the transition. A pause. She gets to live, Ms. O. That's what you want. I'm simply offering you the means. Silence. Think about it tonight, he said gently. You don't have to decide now. But the hospital has a 2-week window, and we both know you have no other options. Sleep on it. Call me tomorrow. The line clicked. She stood at the payphone for a long time. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't needed to. He had simply held her daughter's life in one hand and a solution in the other. She didn't know it yet, but that phone call hadn't been the beginning of his plan. It had been the final step of one that had started months ago. She was never a person to him. She was a key, shaped and cut precisely for one lock, and she had just agreed to be used. She arrived at 7 a.m., like always, made breakfast like always, folded the morning newspaper to the correct page, a habit she had learned Jiwoo preferred, checked that Min-jun's orange juice was fresh, not from concentrate, because he could somehow tell the difference and would announce it with great disappointment if she got it wrong. She moved through these rituals like a woman sleepwalking through her own execution. At 8:15, Kang Jiwoo left for a meeting. His chief of security, Baek Sung-min, accompanied him. 2 guards remained. At 8:40, Soonja went to the laundry room and turned on the machine to cover any sound she might make. She did not pray. She wasn't sure she had the right. At 8:51, she heard the bodyguards' radios crackle, a staged alarm from a floor below, exactly as planned. The 2 guards moved to the stairwell to verify. 23 seconds. That was the window she had described.
23 seconds during a guard rotation. Twice weekly when the corridor outside Min-jun's playroom was unmonitored. She had told them about those 23 seconds. She stood at the laundry room sink, both hands gripping the edge, staring at nothing. She heard nothing from the playroom. No struggle, no crying, no sound at all. Just a silence that settled over the apartment like snow. And then the nanny's scream. High and terrible and endless. Soonja closed her eyes. She told herself, he's safe. He'll be back in a week. Chayan will live. She told herself this, and her hands shook so badly she had to press them flat against the wall. And the scream kept going. And outside the laundry room, she could hear the thunder of running feet, shouted commands, the sharp sound of a radio barking coordinates. And somewhere in the back of her mind, very quietly, like a door opening onto a drop she hadn't seen coming, she knew she had made the worst mistake of her life. Kang Jiwoo received the call at 9:03 a.m., mid-sentence with his legal team. Conference room, 12 floors above street level, glass walls, the whole city laid out below like a map. Baek Sung-min stepped through the door and looked at him once. Jiwoo stopped talking. He had trained Baek Sung-min well enough that the man's expression said everything before his mouth opened. Sir, low, careful. Min-jun is not in the apartment. The legal team went silent.
A junior associate's pen rolled off the table, and nobody moved to pick it up. Jiwoo set his pen down slowly. "Clear the room," he said. Everyone left very quickly. When they were gone, Jiwoo sat alone at the head of the table for exactly 30 seconds. He looked at the city below. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he is considering burning to the ground. Then he stood up. Car, now. He walked into the penthouse 12 minutes later. The nanny was being supported by 2 staff members, still barely coherent. Guards were moving in teams through every room, radios crackling, controlled chaos. It stopped the moment he walked through the door. Everyone froze. He walked to Min-jun's bedroom. He stood in the doorway. The stuffed bear was on the floor. The small shoes lined up neatly beside the bed, a habit Min-jun had developed entirely on his own. Still there. A half-finished cup of orange juice on the side table. On the pillow, a crayon drawing. Jiwoo crossed the room slowly. He picked it up. It was a drawing of 2 figures, one tall, one very small. The small one had labeled himself in shaky Korean letters, Min-jun. The tall figure had a label too, spelled slightly wrong the way 4-year-olds spell things. Appa. Kang Jiwoo stood in his son's empty bedroom holding a crayon drawing, and the 12 men in the hallway outside heard nothing from him. Not a sound. That silence was more frightening than anything they had ever heard him say. He came out 60 seconds later. He looked at Baek-sung-min. "You have 12 hours, he said quietly. Not 13, 12. After that, I will handle this personally, and everyone in this room knows what that means." Nobody in the room needed it explained. Baek-sung-min made one call. Within the hour, Seoul's underworld began to shake. What followed was something few people in Seoul had ever seen in full. Kang Jiwoo activated everything. Every contact, every informant, every favor owed, and every threat held in reserve across 20 years of building power in this city.
Traffic camera footage from a 6-block radius was acquired before the police were even informed. CCTV from 17 surrounding buildings pulled in under an hour, not by the police, who would have needed warrants, but by a private security company that Jiwoo owned through 3 layers of incorporation. Street-level contacts deployed to every district simultaneously. Taxi networks, convenience store owners who owed him protection, hospital intake coordinators, port workers, building supers, an invisible army of people who owed Kang Jiwoo something and now had the opportunity to pay it back. In the situation room set up in his study, Jiwoo stood at the center of it all and coordinated with the precise, cold efficiency of a man who had run operations in the dark for 2 decades. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His second in command, a man named Oh Soonja, no relation to Soonja, briefed him on the progress every 20 minutes. In the hallway outside the study, Junseo's hands were visibly shaking between briefings. Later, he would tell someone, "I've been with him 11 years. I have never been as afraid of him as I was in those 12 hours. Not because of anything he said, because of what he didn't say, because of what I could see behind his eyes that he was holding back." He paused. He was holding back everything. Soonja had been questioned with the other staff, brief, clinical, terrifying, not by police, but by men in dark suits who asked questions that had no obvious connection to each other, but that she understood, somehow, were building a picture she could not allow to be completed. She answered everything, carefully, correctly. She had no idea how. She went home. She sat in her room. She waited for her phone to ring. Park Gin-ho had promised updates. No contact came. By 6 p.m., she was pacing the 4 steps her room allowed in each direction. By 8 p.m., she was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, knees pulled to her chest, Min-jun's voice running through her head on a loop. "You have sad eyes. You can stay. Soonja-shi, I made this drawing for you. Do you like it? Is it good?"
She went to the hospital. She sat beside Cheon's bed. Her daughter was awake, propped against pillows, watching something on a small borrowed tablet with headphones too large for her head. When she saw her mother, she lit up. She pulled the headphones off. "Alma, you came early." "I had time today." Lie. Cheon studied her, the way children study their parents when they know something is wrong, but don't know what. "You look pale." "I'm fine." "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Alma," Cheon gave her a look of patient 8-year-old skepticism. "You forget to eat when you're worried. I can tell." Soonja sat in the chair beside the bed. She took her daughter's hand, thin, warm, with an IV line taped to the back of it, and held it. "I'm going to fix everything," she said. "I promise." Cheon looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said, simply, with absolute faith. Soonja smiled, a full, complete smile that cost her everything she had. On her way out of the hospital, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "There's been a complication. Package transferred to secondary location. Timeline extended. Do not contact us again." She read it 3 times. Then she stood in the hospital corridor, the place where people come to hope and sometimes stay to grieve, and the lie she had told herself, the careful architecture of reasons and reassurances she had built to make this survivable, collapsed in a single moment. Secondary location. Do not contact us.
Park Geun-ho had never intended a quick, clean exchange. He had never intended to return Min-jun in a week. She had been a tool, a simple, useful, disposable tool. And somewhere in this city, a 4-year-old boy who had offered her a crumpled biscuit with both hands was alone and afraid, and she had put him there. She pressed her back against the wall. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor of a hospital corridor. And she made the only decision left that meant anything. She would tell Kang Jiwoo everything. She knew what that meant for her. She was going anyway.
6 a.m., the penthouse building. The lobby security desk had 3 men behind it at this hour, and none of them looked like the kind of people who took unexpected visitors kindly. "I need to see Kang Jiwoo," she said. "Leave. Tell him his housekeeper is here." She met the guard's eyes directly. "Tell him I know where his son is." 7 seconds of silence. The guard's eyes didn't change, but one hand moved to an earpiece. She was upstairs in under 90 seconds. The penthouse was transformed. Screens everywhere, satellite maps, staff moving with the focused urgency of people who had been awake for 21 hours and were running on fear. The air smelled like coffee and tension. Kang Jiwoo was at the window, back to the room, hands clasped behind him, looking at Seoul. He didn't turn when she was brought in. "Mr. Kang," Baek Sung-min said from the doorway, "the housekeeper." Jiwoo turned. He looked at her. She had prepared herself for anger, for the cold, controlled fury she had heard described by people who had been on the wrong side of it. What she saw was worse than anger. His eyes were absolutely still, like the surface of something very deep. He looked at her for 4 seconds without speaking. "You came voluntarily?" he asked Sung-min. "Yes, sir." "Leave us." The room emptied faster than she would have thought possible. Then it was just the 2 of them in the center of an empire built from violence and intelligence and 20 years of surviving things that should have been unsurvivable. "Talk," he said. So she did. She told him everything, every detail, every step, every calculation she had made in that laundry room and why. She told him about the payphone and the 47 million won and the 2 weeks and Cha-yin's hand in hers with the IV line taped to it. She told him about the message. She did not cry. She had no right to cry in front of this man. When she finished, the silence lasted a long time. Jiwoo had not moved. He had not changed expression. He had simply listened with the total, absorbing attention of someone processing information at a level most people never reached. "Park Geun-ho," he said.
He answered before you told him where you were calling from. Yes. He knew your name. Yes. He knew Chayen's diagnosis, the exact treatment cost. Yes. Jiwoo looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, kneel. She knelt. Not from fear, from something that went beyond it. A woman who had done what she had done, who now sat before the father whose child she had handed to strangers. She knelt because she had no other honest response to what she was. He walked toward her slowly. Then he stopped. He looked down at her, and then he said something she hadn't expected. You knew your daughter's name, her diagnosis, the cost of her treatment, the precise 2-week window. He paused. How long have you worked for me? 3 weeks. And how long before your first day was Chayen's specialist consultation, the one that produced the 47 million won figure? She blinked. About 10 days. Jiwoo nodded slowly. Then Park Geun-ho knew a number that your own hospital had calculated less than 2 weeks before he told it to you. He looked at her. Does that seem like something a rival across the city would just happen to know? The realization arrived like cold water. He was watching me before I was placed here, she said. Jiwoo turned away. Get up, he said, and tell me everything about the voice on that phone. Every word, every pause, every inflection. The full picture emerged over the next 3 hours. Jiwoo's team worked fast, and what they found was not a simple rivalry. It was a construction, deliberate, patient, brilliant in its cruelty. Park Geun-ho had started 6 months ago. He had identified that a direct confrontation with Jiwoo was unwinnable. Jiwoo was too defended, too intelligent, too experienced in reading threats before they materialized. So he had gone sideways. He had identified the one variable in Jiwoo's life that wasn't protected by money or power or guards or strategy. Min-jun. To get to Min-jun, he needed access. Not bought access. Bought people were unreliable and traceable. He needed something better. He needed a person who was already broken, already desperate, already at the point where the unthinkable had become thinkable. He had cast a net through Seoul's underworld looking for staff candidates. Cleaning agencies, domestic placement firms, anyone who placed workers in high-security private households. He had been patient, methodical. And then, through a placement agency with a manager who owed Park Geun-ho a debt she had been unable to repay any other way, he had found Oh Soonja. A widow, 3 jobs, a sick daughter with a diagnosis and a price tag and a shrinking window. He had waited. He had monitored her hospital visits. He had had the specialist consultation intercepted, not altered, just observed, and he had known the cost before she did. He had then ensured through the compromised placement agency that she was the candidate selected for the penthouse position. He had placed her in the building. Then he had waited for desperation to do the rest. He had manufactured a crisis, positioned a solution, and waited for a mother's love to complete the operation. He had never expected her to confess. That part was not in his calculation. Jiwoo read the full report in his study. He read it twice. Then he called Baek Sung-min in. Someone inside this organization communicated my son's schedule to Park Geun-ho's people, he said. The guard rotation information she described was accurate. She was given information that only my security team had. Sung-min's face went carefully still. I'll find them, he said. You have 4 hours, Jiwoo said, before we move on the warehouse location. Sung-min stopped. You have a location? We had it 30 minutes ago. Jiwoo stood. CCTV from the Incheon Port Approach Road cross-referenced with a van registered to a shell company that traces to a holding firm I know Park Geun-ho uses for logistics. He looked at Sung-min. He's been watching me for 6 months. I've been watching him for 2 years. I know his infrastructure better than he thinks. He picked up his jacket. Prepare 4 vehicles, armed. We leave in 90 minutes.
"Sir, the police should—" Jiwoo put on his jacket. That was his answer. Incheon, 7:40 p.m. The industrial complex sat beside the water in the dark, gray and enormous and quiet. Container yards to the north. The smell of salt and rust and diesel. The kind of place that exists in every port city in the world specifically because nobody asks questions about what moves through it. 4 black vehicles stopped 400 meters from the entrance, lights off. Inside the lead car, Jiwoo sat in the back seat and said nothing. He had said nothing for most of the drive. Baek Sung-min turned from the passenger seat. "Sir, we have eyes on 2 entrances. 6 guards visible, possibly more inside. I'd recommend you stay with the vehicles while—" "No." "Mr. Kang. Sung-min." He looked at him. "He's my son." A pause. "Yes, sir." They moved at 7:52 p.m. Fast and quiet. Jiwoo's security team had not reached the top of Seoul's underworld by being sentimental about operations. They moved with the efficiency of people who had done versions of this before. Not often, not casually, but when necessary. The perimeter guards were managed in under 4 minutes. Inside the complex, long corridors, poor lighting, the smell of concrete and damp. Jiwoo moved with his team, Sung-min at his shoulder, hand at his side. 3 rooms cleared, empty. 4th room, a guard who hadn't followed the retreat order. There was a brief, intense exchange. One of Jiwoo's men took a hit to the shoulder. "Keep moving," Jiwoo said. His voice was completely flat. 5th corridor.
Sung-min's hand went up. Stop. A door. Light underneath it. And from beneath that door, barely audible, the sound of a small voice. Jiwoo's hand went to the door. "Sir," Sung-min said quietly, "I hear it." He opened the door. The room was small, concrete, a single light hanging from the ceiling, blankets on the floor, and several snacks. Someone had at least done that much, arranged in a small cluster that suggested someone had tried, inadequately, to make this not look like what it was. In the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on a blanket, clutching a small toy car he had apparently been given to keep him occupied, was Min-jun. He looked up. He saw the silhouette in the doorway. He saw the shape of those shoulders. And his face did something that Jiwoo would carry for the rest of his life. The terror, the careful, too quiet control of a 4-year-old who had spent God knows how many hours being very brave and very small, simply collapsed, dissolved, like it had never existed. His face crumpled. "Appa!" Jiwoo was across the room before the word finished. He went to his knees. He pulled Min-jun into his arms and held him, not gently, not carefully, but with the totality of a man who had spent the last 14 hours on the edge of something he couldn't survive. And Min-jun grabbed his father's shirt with both small hands and pressed his face into his shoulder and sobbed. "Appa! Appa, I waited. I kept waiting. I knew." A hiccup. "I knew you would come. I told the man, I said, my Appa will come. And he said—" Another sob. "I waited, Appa." "I'm here." Jiwoo's voice was barely sound. "I've got you. I'm here." "I was so scared." Barely a whisper. I know. I've got you." From the doorway, Baek Sung-min, a former Special Forces soldier who had walked into situations most people never walked back out of, turned to face the corridor. He examined the wall very carefully. He did not trust his face. In the car on the way back to Seoul, Min-jun fell asleep against his father's side within 8 minutes. Jiwoo sat very still. He looked out the window at the city lights passing. After a long time, Baek Sung-min said from the front, "We found the insider, one of the junior security coordinators. He's been flagged and contained. Deal with it." "Yes, sir." Another silence. "The housekeeper," Baek said subtly. Jiwoo looked at his sleeping son, at the small hand still gripping a fistful of his shirt even in sleep. "I'll deal with that, personally," he said. 2 days later, the study. Min-jun was home. He had eaten 3 bowls of rice and given his father a detailed and somewhat incoherent account of everything that had happened, including the information that the bad men's blanket smelled like a bus, and that they had not at any point let him watch his cartoons. "That's the worst part?" Jiwoo had asked. Min-jun had given this genuine consideration. "Also, I missed Soonja. She makes the porridge right." Jiwoo had said nothing. Now he sat across from Soonja in his study, the full report between them on the desk, and he told her everything. Every layer. The 6 months of preparation, the compromised placement agency, the intercepted hospital consultation, the way Park Gun-ho specifically constructed a situation designed to turn a desperate mother's love into a weapon. He read the report slowly. The color left her face in stages. When she reached the section detailing the placement agency, showing the exact sequence of how she had been selected, monitored, positioned, she stopped reading. She put the papers down. "He knew about Cheyenne before I did. He had access to her preliminary test results 2 days before your hospital consultation. He knew the cost before I knew the cost. Yes." She sat with this. "I still made the call," she said finally. Her voice was steady and deliberate, like someone refusing to let themselves off the hook. Yes. Jiwoo did not take it from her. She would have rejected it anyway.
"I want to tell you something," he said. He looked at the window, at the city. "My mother died of cancer. I was 17. The treatment existed. It was available. It was effective. We couldn't afford it. I sat in a public ward and I watched her disappear over 4 months, and I could not do one single thing to stop it." Soonja said nothing. "I have spent 20 years making sure I would never be that powerless again." He paused. "I understand what it is to do arithmetic at 3 a.m. in a dark room and come up with a number that doesn't add up to enough. I understand what it feels like when the only options in front of you are unbearable." He looked at her then, directly. "That is not absolution. I want you to be clear about that. What you did has consequences. It will always have consequences." "I know. But," he said, "you also walked into this apartment and told me the truth when you had no logical reason to. You gave me information that found my son." A pause. "And you did it knowing I might not let you walk out again." She met his eyes. "Min-jun needed to be found," she said. "That mattered more." He studied her for a long moment. "He asked about you," Jiwoo said. "Yesterday morning, first thing. He wanted to know if Soonja had come in yet, because he had a drawing he made for you." He stopped. "He made it while he was in that room. On a piece of paper he asked them to give him. He sat in that concrete room and made you a drawing." The crack in her composure was almost invisible. Almost. "My son," Jiwoo said carefully, "trusts you. He trusted you when he had no reason to, which is, apparently, something he inherited." He looked at the photograph of Ji-yeon on his desk. "His mother did the same thing. She trusted people before they had earned it. It drove me insane." A beat. It was also, usually, right. He stood. "Your daughter's treatment will be covered, fully." He said it like a fact, not a gift. "Not for you, because a child who did nothing wrong should not die for the decisions of the adults around her." Soonja exhaled, a long, shaking breath she had been holding for what felt like days. "The position here," he continued, his back to her now, looking at the city, "it's yours if you want it. That is not forgiveness. I want to be precise about that. It is a decision made for operational and personal reasons that have nothing to do with forgiveness." She looked at his back. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because my son has no mother," he said, and the world is full of people who are kind to him because they fear me. You were kind to him before you knew to fear me." He turned. "That's rarer than you might think."
6 months later. The Han River at dusk turns the color of old copper and new fire. The lights of Seoul come on one by one, reflected in the water, and the city breathes its enormous, indifferent breath over 10 million separate stories. In the penthouse on the 47th floor, a small boy is sitting at the kitchen table. His tongue is pressed between his teeth. He is coloring with the focused intensity of someone composing a symphony. Beside him, a woman with tired eyes and healing hands is chopping vegetables. Every few minutes, he holds up the drawing. "Soonja-shi." "Yes? Is it good?" She looks. It is a drawing of 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one very small, all holding hands. The small one has labeled them in shaky, mostly correct Korean. The tall figure, Appa. The medium figure, Soonja. The small figure, me. "It's your best one yet," she says. He looks deeply satisfied. He goes back to coloring. She goes back to the vegetables. Her hands are still a little red. They'll probably always be a little red. Some things don't entirely heal. They just become part of the texture of a life. From the hallway, there are footsteps. Measured, deliberate. The sound of a man who always knows exactly where he is going. Jiwoo stops in the kitchen doorway. Min-jun doesn't look up. "Appa, Soonja-shi said my drawing is the best one yet. Let me see." Min-jun holds it up proudly. Jiwoo looks at it for a moment, at the 3 figures, at the labels. "It is," he says. "Save it. I want it for my office." Min-jun's face becomes radiant with pride so total and pure that it looks like a light turned on from inside. "Okay," he says, very seriously, "I'll sign it." He picks up his crayon. Jiwoo meets Soonja's eyes across the kitchen. Nothing is said. Everything is understood. He turns and walks down the hallway. He has a call in 10 minutes, 3 situations that require his attention. Seoul doesn't stop being Seoul because a man wants a quiet evening. But he walks a little slower than usual. Across the city, in a hospital that smells like disinfectant and the particular kind of hope that lives in medical corridors, a 9-year-old girl named Chaeyeon is sitting up in bed without help for weeks. The doctors use words like remarkable and favorable trajectory. Chaeyeon uses the word hungry, which her mother bursts into tears about. "Ma, it's good that I'm hungry," Chaeyeon says patiently. "It means I feel better." "I know. "Then why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy." She takes her daughter's hand. "I'm so happy I don't know what else to do." Chaeyeon thinks about this. Then she nods, as if this is a perfectly reasonable response to happiness. "Okay," she says, very seriously. "Can you get me rice? I want real rice, not the hospital kind." Soonja laughs, a real laugh, the whole body kind, the kind she hasn't produced in long enough that it surprises her. "Yes," she says, "real rice." Somewhere in Seoul, in a district that doesn't appear on tourist maps, in a room that has no comfortable chairs, a man named Park Gun-ho is explaining himself to people who are not interested in explanations. We won't follow him in there. Some rooms are better left closed. The city outside the penthouse window looks the same as it always has. Glass and light and the Han River turning dark. 10 million people moving through the Tuesday evening of their ordinary lives, each one the center of a story nobody else will ever fully see. Inside the kitchen, a small boy finishes signing his drawing. He holds it up. It reads, in the careful, slightly irregular handwriting of a 4-year-old who has been practicing very hard, "Min-jun Kang, the best." "Does it look professional?" he asks.
Soonja considers this very seriously. Extremely, she says. He nods with enormous satisfaction. And somewhere in the penthouse, the most feared man in Seoul opens a desk drawer and looks at 17 crayon drawings already living inside it, and he adds a space, carefully, deliberately, for one more. There are things that break people, and there are people who break, and somehow, in the breaking, discover what they were made of. Not every story ends in clean resolution. Some end in something quieter. In a child's laugh in a kitchen, in a woman's healing hands, in a man who keeps crayon drawings in a locked drawer where no one will see them except him, in the small, stubborn, extraordinary fact of a family that has no clean name, assembled from loss and guilt and choices that cannot be undone, choosing, despite everything, to remain. That is not a fairy tale ending. It is something more durable than that. It is real.
Please like and subscribe.